Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The anniversary he forgot. Some people say the most painful moments in marriage begin with a loud argument. Mine began with silence. If you have ever wondered whether love can disappear without anyone saying goodbye, this story may surprise you. On one ordinary morning in the United States, I believed my husband had forgotten the most important date of our lives. That single moment made me question every smile, every promise, and every memory we had built together. But what I discovered later changed the way I understood love forever. As you listen, notice the simple English expressions in this story. They are the kind of everyday phrases Americans really use, making the story both an emotional journey and gentle English listening practice. I woke up before the sun came through the bedroom window. The house was quiet except for the soft sound of our heating system. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful, with green lawns, children waiting for school buses, and neighbors walking their dogs as they did almost every morning. It felt like a beautiful day. More importantly, it was our wedding anniversary. I smiled before my feet even touched the floor because I had been thinking about this day for weeks. After 12 years of marriage, I did not expect expensive jewelry or a luxury vacation. I only hoped for something simple. Maybe breakfast together. Maybe flowers from the grocery store. Maybe just hearing him say, "Happy anniversary." Sometimes the smallest words carry the greatest meaning. I walked into the kitchen and quietly started making coffee. The rich smell filled the room while I looked at our wedding photo hanging on the wall. In that picture, we looked so young, so fearless, and so certain that love could solve every problem. I laughed softly at my younger self. Life in America had taught us many lessons since then. Raising children, paying bills, balancing work, and finding time for each other was not always easy. Yet I still believed we had something special. A few minutes later, my husband came downstairs. He looked sleepy, grabbed a coffee mug, checked his phone, and smiled politely at me.
Morning.
That was it.
No hug. No kiss.
No happy anniversary. Just one ordinary word. Morning. At first, I thought he was joking. Maybe he wanted to surprise me later. I smiled anyway. Good morning, I answered. He poured himself coffee, opened the refrigerator, made a quick sandwich, and started reading emails on his phone. His face looked completely normal, almost too normal. My heart whispered, he wouldn't forget. Would he? Psychologists often explain that our brains naturally notice negative signals more strongly than positive ones. It is called the negativity bias. One unexpected disappointment can suddenly erase dozens of happy memories, at least for a little while. Sitting there at the kitchen table, I realized how true that was. My mind began searching for evidence that something was wrong instead of remembering everything that had gone right. I tried to focus on something else. I opened my English notebook where I write useful expressions I hear every day. One sentence was written at the top of the page. Don't jump to conclusions. It means, don't make assumptions before you know the facts. I smiled at the irony because that was exactly what I was struggling not to do. He finished breakfast, picked up his car keys, and headed toward the front door. I'm leaving now, he said.
Still nothing.
I watched the door close behind him. The silence suddenly felt much louder than any argument. For several minutes, I stood by the kitchen window watching his truck disappear down our quiet suburban street. I told myself that mature adults should not become emotional over one forgotten date. Maybe work was stressful. Maybe he had too much on his mind. Maybe the celebration would come tonight. But another voice inside me kept asking a different question. If someone can forget the day we promised forever, what else can they forget? The rest of the morning became strangely heavy. Even folding laundry reminded me of anniversaries from previous years. There had always been laughter, handwritten notes, homemade dinners, or little surprises. Nothing extravagant, but always thoughtful. This year felt completely different. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. For one hopeful second, I expected a sweet message. Instead, it was only a notification from our family grocery app. No text.
No flowers.
No call. I took a deep breath and looked once more at our wedding photograph. Something suddenly caught my attention. There was a small white envelope tucked behind the frame. I was certain it had never been there before. With shaking hands, I slowly reached toward it, but before I could touch it, I heard the sound of a car stopping in front of our house. Someone had just arrived. The envelope and the stranger. The strange thing about heartbreak is that it makes every tiny sound feel important. A car door closing outside suddenly seemed louder than my own heartbeat. My hand was only inches away from the mysterious, white envelope hidden behind our wedding photo, yet I froze. Was this the answer I had been waiting for, or was it the beginning of something much worse? In that quiet American neighborhood, on the day I thought my husband had forgotten our anniversary, I was about to discover that appearances can fool even the people who know us best. I slowly stepped away from the picture frame and walked toward the front window. A dark blue SUV was parked in front of our house. It wasn't my husband's truck. I had never seen the vehicle before. My first thought was that a package had arrived, but instead of a delivery driver, I saw a woman about my age standing on the sidewalk. She looked around for a moment before walking toward my front door with something in her hands. The doorbell rang. I hesitated for only a second before opening it. "Hi," she said with a warm but slightly nervous smile. "Are you Emma?" "Yes," I answered carefully. "My name is Rachel. I'm sorry for stopping by without calling first." She held a medium-sized cardboard box decorated with a simple blue ribbon. It looked carefully wrapped, but had no shipping label. "I think this belongs to you." For a moment, I simply stared at the box.
I
"Don't understand." "I was asked to bring it here today," she replied. "By who?" She paused just long enough to make my curiosity grow. "I'm really not supposed to explain." Before I could ask another question, she politely placed the box in my hands. "Just trust him." Those 3 words echoed in my mind. Trust him. She smiled again, walked back to her SUV, and drove away without another sentence. I stood alone on my front porch, holding a box that suddenly felt much heavier than cardboard should. Back inside, I placed it on the kitchen table beside my untouched coffee. My eyes moved between the mysterious box and the white envelope still hidden behind our wedding photo. Which one should I open first? Life sometimes feels like reading an English story where you recognize every word but still don't understand the meaning. That happens in language learning too. You may know the vocabulary, but the full message only becomes clear when you see the complete context. Relationships often work the same way. We hear words, notice actions, and build our own conclusions long before we know the whole story. One useful English expression came to my mind. Things aren't always what they seem. Americans often use this phrase to remind each other not to judge a situation too quickly. I quietly repeated it to myself. Things aren't always what they seem. It sounded comforting. Unfortunately, my emotions were louder than my logic. I carefully untied the blue ribbon. Inside the box was soft white tissue paper. Underneath it sat an elegant glass vase. Nothing else.
no flowers.
No letter.
No explanation.
I turned the vase around and noticed something engraved near the bottom. For tonight. That was all. Just 2 words. For tonight. My confusion grew even deeper. Was my husband planning a surprise dinner? If so, why had he ignored me all morning? Why ask a stranger to deliver an empty vase? Why hide an envelope behind our wedding photograph? The questions kept multiplying. I picked up the vase and placed it beside the window where sunlight reflected through the glass, creating small rainbows across the kitchen wall. It was beautiful, but instead of making me happy, it made me uneasy. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my husband. Finally. My heart raced as I opened the message.
It read, I'm sorry.
Today may not go the way you expect. Please don't leave the house before 6 p.m. Nothing more. No heart emoji.
No anniversary wishes. No explanation.
Just another mystery. I read the message at least 5 times. Was he apologizing because he remembered too late? Or because something terrible had happened? Outside, dark clouds slowly gathered over the neighborhood, even though the morning forecast had promised sunshine all day. The changing weather somehow matched my thoughts. In many parts of the United States, people joke that the weather can change in minutes. That afternoon, my emotions were changing even faster. Unable to resist any longer, I walked back to the living room. The white envelope was still waiting behind our wedding photograph. This time, I carefully pulled it free. My name was written across the front in my husband's handwriting. I unfolded it slowly. The first sentence made my breath stop. If you are reading this, it means my plan has already gone wrong. A letter that changed everything. Have you ever opened a letter expecting one answer, only to find 100 new questions instead? My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock. The mysterious envelope, the stranger with the blue ribbon, the empty vase, and my husband's cold behavior all seemed connected somehow. But nothing made sense yet. As I unfolded the letter, I realized this anniversary was becoming something I could never have imagined, and I wasn't sure whether I was about to cry, smile, or lose the little confidence I still had. I held the paper with both hands because they would not stop shaking. My husband had always been the kind of man who preferred talking face to face. He rarely wrote long messages, and he almost never left handwritten notes. Seeing his familiar handwriting made everything feel strangely personal. The first sentence still echoed inside my mind. If you are reading this, it means my plan has already gone wrong. I swallowed hard and continued reading. Please don't be angry before you know the whole story. I've been trying to make today perfect, but life doesn't always follow the plans we make. If everything works, you'll understand tonight. If it doesn't, I need you to trust me just a little longer. That was all.
No explanation.
No details. No reason. Just another request for trust. I leaned back against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes for a moment. Trust sounded like such a simple word, but after 12 years of marriage, I knew it was built one ordinary day at a time. It wasn't created by grand speeches. It grew through small habits, honest conversations, and showing up when life became difficult. At least, that was what I had always believed. Yet this morning had quietly shaken that belief. I read the letter again, hoping hidden meaning would suddenly appear between the lines.
It didn't.
Instead, another memory appeared. About 3 weeks earlier, my husband had asked an unusual question while we were eating dinner. If you could relive one day from our marriage, he had said, which day would you choose? At the time, I laughed. Our wedding day, of course. He smiled, but there had been something thoughtful in his eyes. What if I could make an ordinary day even more meaningful than our wedding day? I remembered teasing him. That's impossible. He simply smiled without answering. Until this moment, I had completely forgotten that conversation. Now it returned with unexpected force. Was that question connected to today? I looked around the kitchen. Everything suddenly felt different. The coffee mug he had used that morning was still sitting in the sink. His jacket was gone. His favorite baseball cap was missing from the hallway hook. Every ordinary detail reminded me that someone could appear completely calm while secretly carrying a complicated plan. Psychologists often describe something called the fundamental attribution error. It means people naturally judge someone else's actions without knowing their hidden circumstances. If a stranger is rude, we assume they are a rude person. If someone forgets an important date, we assume they don't care. Our brains create stories long before we discover the facts. I quietly whispered another useful English expression. Don't judge a book by its cover. Most English learners know this idiom, but living through it felt very different from memorizing it. Still, my emotions refused to cooperate. If my husband truly cared, why couldn't he simply say, "Happy anniversary"? Would one sentence really have ruined his surprise? Those questions refused to leave me alone. I walked into the living room again and sat beside our large front window. Outside, children rode bicycles through the neighborhood, while two elderly neighbors watered their gardens and waved at everyone who passed. It looked like another peaceful American afternoon. Inside my heart, nothing felt peaceful. Then my phone rang. It wasn't my husband. The caller ID showed the name of our daughter's elementary school. For one frightening second, every terrible possibility rushed into my mind. I answered immediately. "Hello." A cheerful voice greeted me. "Hi, Mrs. Carter. Don't worry. Emily is perfectly fine." I exhaled so deeply that I almost laughed. "We're calling because your husband asked permission to pick Emily up early today." I frowned. My husband?
Yes.
He said it was for a special family event. A special family event. He had never mentioned picking her up. He already signed her out about 20 minutes ago. I thanked the school secretary and slowly lowered my phone. Now my confusion grew even larger. If he was planning something beautiful, why leave me alone all day? If everything had gone wrong, as the letter claimed, why was he calmly collecting our daughter from school? Before I could think any further, my smartwatch vibrated with a calendar reminder. 6 p.m. Anniversary dinner. I stared at the notification. It was only 2:15. Almost 4 more hours remained. Then my security camera sent a motion alert. Someone had just walked onto my front porch again. This time, it wasn't a stranger. It was my husband, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a little girl holding an enormous bouquet of white roses, and both of them looked terrified. The girl with the white roses. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with dramatic music or a perfect speech. Sometimes it knocks on your front door holding a bouquet of white roses while everyone involved looks terrified. As I watched the live security camera on my phone, my heart raced faster than it had all day. My husband was finally home, but nothing about the scene looked like the romantic anniversary surprise I had imagined for weeks. Standing beside him was a little girl I had never seen before, and in that moment I realized this mysterious day was far from over. I hurried to the front door, my thoughts tangled between hope and fear. Every possibility rushed through my mind. Was she a neighbor's daughter? Was this part of the surprise? Or had something gone terribly wrong? When I opened the door, my husband looked directly into my eyes for the first time that day.
He looked exhausted.
Not distracted. Not careless.
Exhausted.
The little girl standing beside him couldn't have been older than 8 years old. She wore a light blue dress and carefully held an oversized bouquet of fresh white roses that almost seemed too heavy for her small hands. She smiled shyly before looking down at the flowers again. "I'm sorry," my husband said quietly. Those were the first words that carried real emotion all day. Before I could answer, the little girl stepped forward. "These are for you." Her voice was soft and slightly nervous. I accepted the bouquet with both hands. They're beautiful, I whispered. Thank you. She smiled with visible relief, almost as if she had completed an important mission. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me a folded card. It's from him. I looked at my husband. He nodded gently. Please read it. The card was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. On the front were 3 simple words written in familiar handwriting. For my best friend. My chest tightened. Inside, the message was surprisingly short. I couldn't say happy anniversary this morning because I wanted today to tell a story instead of beginning with words. Please stay with me until tonight. I promise every confusing moment has a reason. I looked up slowly. You planned all of this? I tried to. Tried. He sighed. It hasn't gone the way I expected. For the first time all day, I noticed the tiny details I had missed before. His shirt sleeve was wrinkled. There was dust on his shoes. His hair looked windblown, and beneath his tired smile were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like someone who had been running from one place to another since sunrise. Not someone who had forgotten his wife. The little girl glanced toward the driveway. My mom is waiting. My husband smiled warmly at her. Thank you again, Lily. She waved goodbye before running toward a nearby car where a woman waited patiently behind the steering wheel. As they drove away, I turned back to my husband. Who was she? He smiled. Someone who wanted to help make today special. That answer explained almost nothing. I couldn't help laughing. You've become very mysterious. I know, and it's driving me crazy. I know that too. For the first time all day, we both smiled at the same moment. It felt small, but it felt real. One thing I've learned while improving my English is that Americans often say, actions speak louder than words. At first, I thought it was only another common expression. But standing there with white roses in my arms, I began wondering if my husband had been trying to communicate through actions all along. Even if I hadn't understood the language of his plan yet. Still, questions remained. Many questions. Why did you ask me not to leave the house? You'll understand later. Why the empty vase? You'll understand later. The envelope? He smiled apologetically. Later. I crossed my arms. I don't like later. I know. His answer made me laugh despite myself. Then something unexpected happened. His phone rang. The smile disappeared from his face almost instantly. He looked at the screen without answering. For several seconds he simply stared. Finally he whispered, almost to himself, No. Not now. He stepped away from the front porch before answering the call. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough to know something had changed. What? A long pause. You're kidding. Another silence.
No.
I'll come immediately. When he ended the call, all the color had drained from his face. What happened? I asked. He looked at me with genuine disappointment. I have to leave again. What? I don't want to. Then don't. I don't have a choice. The excitement that had finally started returning to my heart disappeared just as quickly. Another interruption. Another mystery. Another delay. He gently held both of my hands. I know today feels confusing. That's an understatement. I promise you one thing.
What?
By tonight, you'll know why forgetting 3 words this morning was the hardest decision I've made in years. I stood on the porch holding the white roses, watching him drive away for the second time that day. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated. A new message appeared from an unknown number. I opened it. There was only one photograph. It showed my husband standing inside a hospital hallway beside a wheelchair. And sitting in that wheelchair was someone I recognized immediately. Someone I hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. The face I never expected to see again. There are moments when one photograph can erase an entire afternoon of assumptions. I stared at my phone, unable to blink, because the woman sitting in that hospital wheelchair was someone I had once loved like family and then somehow lost through the ordinary chaos of
life.
My husband had been with her instead of with me on our anniversary, and suddenly every mystery became even more complicated. I thought I was searching for proof that he still loved me. Instead, I was about to uncover a story that had been quietly unfolding behind my back for months. I zoomed in on the picture with trembling fingers. There was no mistake. The woman was Grace, my older sister. We had grown up together, shared a bedroom for years, laughed until midnight, borrowed each other's clothes, and promised we would always stay close. Life, however, has a strange way of separating people without dramatic fights. Careers became busy. Children needed attention. Different cities, different schedules, and countless "we'll visit soon" messages slowly replaced real conversations. We never stopped loving each other. We simply stopped making enough time. The last time I had seen Grace in person was almost 10 years ago during a family reunion in Colorado. Since then, we mostly exchanged birthday texts and Christmas photos. Every year we said we would plan a longer visit. Every year something came up. I looked again at the hospital background in the photo. Why was she there? Why hadn't anyone called me? Why was my husband standing beside her? The unknown number sent another message before I could type anything. Please don't worry. Everything will make sense soon. That sentence sounded strangely familiar. Everyone seemed to know something except me. I sat down on the living room sofa with the white roses resting beside me. Their gentle fragrance filled the room, but my thoughts were far away. Outside, the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds, lighting up the neighborhood in warm golden colors. Children laughed while riding scooters. Someone nearby was mowing the lawn. An American flag moved gently in the summer breeze across the street. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside my mind, a storm continued. One interesting thing about learning English is that many everyday expressions describe emotions through weather. Americans often say, "I'm in the dark," meaning they don't know what is happening. Another common phrase is, "the clouds are beginning to clear," meaning confusion is slowly disappearing. At that moment, I understood both expressions perfectly. I was still in the dark, but tiny pieces of light were beginning to appear. I walked over to the dining room where our family calendar hung on the wall. Something suddenly caught my attention. Over the past several months, my husband had written small notes on different dates. Meeting, appointment, volunteer, community center. I had never paid much attention to them because our lives were always busy. Looking at them now, I realized many of those appointments had happened on Friday afternoons, exactly when he usually claimed he was working late. Had he really been working? Or had he been visiting Grace? The more I looked, the more questions appeared. Then I remembered something else. About 2 months earlier, I had noticed a charge on our bank statement from a local flower shop. When I jokingly asked if he had bought flowers for someone else, he laughed and quickly changed the subject. I had forgotten about it until now. Perhaps I had forgotten because trusting someone often means not investigating every unusual detail. Maybe that trust had been justified all along. Or maybe I was still missing the biggest piece of the puzzle. My phone rang again. This time it was my husband. I answered immediately. "Where are you?" "Still at the hospital." "Is Grace okay?" There was a long silence. "You know it's Grace?" I saw the picture. Another pause. "I wanted you to meet her tonight. Why didn't you tell me she was here?" "Because." His voice broke slightly.
She wanted it to be a surprise.
I closed my eyes.
A surprise?
At a hospital? It's a long story. Then tell me. I can't yet. I almost laughed in frustration. You keep saying that. I know. Please, just tell me one thing.
What?
Is she seriously ill? Silence. The kind of silence that makes your imagination create its own frightening answers. Finally, he spoke. She's stronger than you think. It wasn't really an answer. Before I could ask another question, I heard another voice in the background. A woman's voice.
Soft. Familiar.
Then I heard my own name.
Emma.
I froze. It was Grace. She sounded weaker than I remembered, but it was unmistakably her. I can't wait to see you, she said. Then the phone disconnected. I stared at the screen in complete silence. A few seconds later, another message arrived from my husband. Be ready by 6 p.m. Wear the blue dress you wore on our 10th anniversary.
Trust me one last time.
I slowly looked toward my bedroom closet. The blue dress was still hanging exactly where I had left it 2 years earlier. As I reached for it, something slipped from one of its pockets and fell onto the floor. It wasn't mine. It was a small velvet jewelry box. And judging by the layer of dust on top, it had been hidden there for a very long time. The secret inside the velvet box. Have you ever found something in your own home that made you question how many invisible acts of love had happened while you were busy living your ordinary life? I picked up the dusty velvet jewelry box with shaking hands, certain it must have been hidden there for years. The mysterious letters, the empty vase, my sister at the hospital, the little girl with the white roses, and my husband's strange behavior all seemed to point toward one truth, but I still couldn't see the whole picture. I was only looking at scattered puzzle pieces, and the final image remained hidden. I slowly brushed the dust from the top of the box. It had fallen from the pocket of my blue anniversary dress, a dress I had carefully stored after our 10th wedding anniversary. Somehow, during the past 2 years, someone had slipped the box into the pocket without me noticing. There was only one person who could have done that. My husband. I sat on the edge of the bed and carefully opened the lid. Inside was not a ring, not a necklace. Instead, I found a folded handwritten note and a tiny silver key attached to a white ribbon. The note read, "If you're opening this today, then fate has taken a different path than I planned. This key opens something we've been building together, even though you never knew it." Again, no explanation. I couldn't help smiling despite everything. "My husband," I whispered, "you really do love mysteries." I turned the little key over in my hand. There were no numbers, no label, no clue about what it unlocked, only a small engraved heart on one side. I looked around the bedroom, wondering if there was some hidden box or a locked drawer I had forgotten about. Nothing seemed different. Everything was exactly where it had always been. Sometimes learning a language feels exactly like this. You recognize every individual word, but until someone gives you the missing context, the message remains incomplete. One English phrase my teacher once shared stayed in my memory: the missing piece. Americans use it when one final detail suddenly makes everything understandable. At that moment, I knew I still hadn't found my missing piece. My phone buzzed. Another text from my husband. "How's the blue dress?" I laughed out loud for the first time all day. "It still fits," I replied. A few seconds later, he answered. I knew it would. Then nothing. Still no explanation. Still no happy anniversary. I stood before the bedroom mirror and slowly put on the blue dress. Looking at my reflection brought back memories of our 10th anniversary dinner at a small lakeside restaurant in Illinois. We hadn't exchanged expensive gifts that year either. Instead, we had promised each other something much more valuable. We'll never stop choosing each other. I remembered repeating those words while holding his hands across the dinner table. Back then, they sounded romantic.
Today, they sounded necessary.
As I finished getting ready, my daughter Emily suddenly ran into the room.
Mom.
She stopped the moment she saw the dress. You look beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. She smiled with a strange excitement I couldn't quite understand. Dad said you'd wear that. He did. She nodded proudly. He said today would be your happiest surprise ever. I knelt beside her. Emily, do you know what's going on? She pressed her lips together dramatically. I promised not to tell. I laughed. Even me? Especially you. Children can keep secrets surprisingly well when they believe they're helping someone they love. Emily hugged me tightly before running back downstairs. As I followed her, I noticed something unusual. The empty glass vase was no longer empty. Fresh white roses now filled it completely. I stopped in the middle of the staircase. I had been upstairs for only 15 minutes. No one had entered the house. No delivery notification.
No doorbell.
Yet the vase now looked exactly as if it had always been meant to hold those flowers. Tucked between the roses was another small envelope. This one contained only a single photograph. It showed my husband standing beside Grace. But this time they weren't inside the hospital. They were standing in front of a newly renovated building with a wooden sign that read, "The Carter Family Learning House." My eyes widened. Learning house? Underneath the photo, my husband had written one sentence. Everything you've dreamed about helping others learn begins here tonight. Helping others learn? I whispered the words again. They didn't make sense. I had often talked about volunteering, reading with children, and helping adults practice conversational English in our community. But those were just dreams I shared over dinner. Dreams. Nothing more and less. A loud knock echoed through the house. Emily ran toward the front door shouting happily, "They're here. They're finally here." I hurried after her. When the door opened, I froze. Our front yard was suddenly filled with neighbors, friends, teachers, and families from across town. And standing in the very front, holding a microphone, was Grace. The surprise I never imagined. What if the moment that almost convinced you your marriage was falling apart turned out to be the moment your partner had been quietly rebuilding your dreams? I stood frozen at my front door, unable to believe what I was seeing. My sister Grace, who had been in a hospital just hours earlier, was now standing in my front yard with a microphone. Around her were neighbors, teachers, children, friends, and families I recognized from our community. The mystery that had filled my entire anniversary was finally beginning to unfold, but one final secret still waited for me. The warm evening sun painted everything in soft golden light. Small white lights had been hung between the trees in our front yard. Folding chairs formed neat rows across the grass, and children laughed as they chased bubbles floating through the air. Someone had set up speakers playing gentle acoustic music. The whole scene looked less like a party and more like a community celebration. I looked at my husband. "You planned all of this?" He smiled, but this time there was no mystery in his eyes. Only relief. "I've been planning it for almost 8 months. 8 months. The number echoed inside my mind. Every late meeting. Every unusual appointment. Every strange receipt. Every Friday afternoon. None of it had been what I imagined. Grace stepped closer and hugged me so tightly that neither of us spoke for several seconds. When she finally pulled away, I noticed tears in her eyes. "I've missed you," she whispered. "I've missed you too. I wanted to tell you everything." "Then why didn't you?" She laughed softly. "Because your husband wouldn't let me." I turned toward him with an expression that was half amusement and half disbelief. "You've been keeping secrets with my own sister?" He raised both hands innocently. "I recruited help." Grace smiled. "He wanted today to become a memory instead of just another anniversary." I looked around again. People I hadn't seen in years waved from different corners of the yard. My daughter's elementary school teacher smiled warmly. The elderly couple from across the street stood beside a table filled with homemade desserts. Even Rachel, the woman who had delivered the mysterious box that morning, was there arranging flowers. Suddenly, every confusing moment began connecting together. The empty vase, the white roses, the envelopes, the strange visitors. None of them had been accidents. Everything had been part of one enormous surprise. Americans often use the expression, "it all comes together." It's a simple phrase meaning every confusing piece finally makes sense. As an English learner, I always thought it sounded nice. Living through it was something completely different. I could almost feel my heart putting the puzzle together one piece at a time. Grace gently touched my arm. "There's something you still don't know." I looked at her. "The hospital?" She nodded. "I wasn't sick." I blinked.
What?
"I've been volunteering there." I stared in complete surprise. "Volunteering?" She smiled. "We help children recovering from long hospital stays continue learning through reading and conversation." My husband stepped beside her. And every time Emma talked about wishing more people had a safe place to practice English without feeling embarrassed. He paused. I wrote it down. I felt my throat tighten. "You remembered that?" I remembered all of it. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a piece of paper. It wasn't a speech. It was several pages. "Want to know why I didn't say happy anniversary this morning?" I nodded silently. Because if I had started with those words, today would have become another anniversary. He looked around at everyone gathered before continuing. "I wanted today to become the day your biggest dream finally began." The crowd quietly applauded. I couldn't stop crying. He smiled gently. "You once told me that learning English changed your confidence because stories helped you feel less afraid of making mistakes." I laughed through my tears. "I remember. So, we built something around that idea." He pointed toward the large banner hanging between two trees. Until then, I hadn't noticed it. Across the top were the words, "Welcome to the Carter Family Learning House." Below the title was another sentence, "Where every story builds confidence." I covered my mouth. The renovated building from the photograph suddenly made sense. It wasn't just another community center. It was real. My husband continued speaking. "We rented the old library building downtown." I gasped. "We renovated it with volunteers." Another surprise. "We partnered with local teachers." Another surprise. "And starting next month." He looked directly at me. "You'll be leading free slow English storytelling evenings for families, new learners, and anyone who wants a place to practice speaking without fear." The applause grew even louder. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For years I had dreamed about creating exactly this kind of place. A welcoming space where people could improve English through real conversations and heartfelt stories instead of feeling judged. My dream had somehow become real without me knowing. I walked toward my husband and wrapped my arms around him. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "For what?" "For believing you forgot us." He smiled. "I never forgot." "I know." Then he leaned closer. "I still haven't given you your anniversary gift." I laughed. "I thought this whole day was the gift." "It is. But there's one more surprise." Before I could ask what he meant, every light in the yard suddenly went out. The music stopped. The entire neighborhood became silent. Then, somewhere behind the crowd, a projector turned on. A giant screen slowly lit up. The first image appeared. It was a video. And somehow, it had started with a recording from our wedding day that I had believed was lost forever. The video we thought was gone forever. The moment the giant screen lit up in our front yard, every conversation stopped. Children became quiet, neighbors leaned forward, and I instinctively reached for my husband's hand. I had believed our original wedding video was lost forever after an old hard drive failed years ago. Yet there it was, playing beneath the evening sky. And within seconds I realized this anniversary still held one final chapter one never could have predicted. The picture on the screen flickered for just a moment before becoming perfectly clear. There I was, 12 years younger, standing outside a small white church in Illinois with a nervous smile that I remembered better than I expected. My father adjusted my veil, while my mother laughed because the wind refused to cooperate. I heard voices that I hadn't heard in years. Some belonged to relatives who had since moved across the country. Others belonged to loved ones who were no longer with us. Without realizing it, tears rolled quietly down my face. My husband gently squeezed my hand. I wanted you to hear their voices again. I couldn't answer. The video continued. The camera showed us exchanging vows, smiling through happy tears, promising to stay together through every ordinary day, as well as every unexpected storm. Watching those younger versions of ourselves felt almost unreal. We looked hopeful, fearless, and completely unaware of everything life would eventually teach us. Then something happened that I didn't remember from the wedding. The camera zoomed in on my husband's face just before the ceremony began. Apparently, someone had been recording before I walked down the aisle. He looked directly into the camera and whispered, "I hope she never doubts how much I love her." The crowd watching the video became completely silent. I slowly turned toward him. "You said that?" He smiled shyly. I forgot that part was recorded. My heart melted. One beautiful thing about learning English through real stories is discovering expressions that carry deep emotion. One phrase Americans often use is "from the bottom of my heart." It means speaking with complete honesty and love. Listening to my younger husband speak those words, I understood that phrase in a way no textbook could ever explain. The video moved forward through the years. Our first apartment. Our daughter's first birthday. Family road trips across Wisconsin and Michigan. Snowball fights in our front yard.
Camping weekends.
Late-night pancake dinners. Even ordinary moments like washing dishes together somehow looked precious on the screen. Then I noticed something unusual. Many of the clips had been recorded recently. There I was reading storybooks aloud to neighborhood children during library volunteer days. Another clip showed me helping an elderly neighbor practice conversational English over coffee. Another showed me encouraging Emily while she practiced reading aloud for school. I had no idea anyone had been filming those quiet moments. I looked at my husband again. "When did you record all this?"
He laughed.
"Whenever you weren't looking." Grace smiled beside him. "We all helped." Rachel raised her hand from across the yard. "So did I." Everyone laughed. The video slowly faded into a black screen. Then new words appeared. "Some people measure love by gifts." Another line appeared. "Some measure it by years." A third line followed. "I measure it by the dreams we protect for each other." My husband stepped in front of the screen. "I know this anniversary didn't begin the way you expected." I smiled through my tears. "That's true. I also know you spent most of today wondering if I had forgotten." "I did." He nodded. "I never forgot. I know that now." He reached into his pocket once more. This time, he wasn't holding an envelope. He was holding a small silver key. Exactly like the one I had found inside the velvet box upstairs. He held it beside mine. "They match," I whispered. "They're supposed to." "What do they open?" He smiled. "Our new beginning." The crowd quietly stepped aside. Parked across the street was a small renovated building I somehow hadn't noticed before because of the decorations and gathering. Above the entrance hung a wooden sign illuminated by warm lights. The Carter Family Learning House. My husband handed me his key. It takes both keys. Both. One belongs to you. The other belongs to me. I looked at the old wooden door. Together we walked toward it while everyone followed behind us. Our daughter skipped happily between us, holding both of our hands. As we reached the entrance, we each inserted a key into one of the two locks. My husband counted softly. 1. The crowd smiled. 2. Everyone became silent. 3. We turned the keys together. A gentle click echoed through the evening. The door slowly opened. Inside, all the lights turned on automatically. Books lined the walls. Comfortable reading chairs filled the room. Children's story corners, conversation tables, community classrooms, and handwritten welcome signs covered every wall. But hanging directly in the center of the room was something that stole my breath. A framed wooden plaque. On it was a sentence written in elegant lettering. It wasn't my husband's handwriting. It wasn't Grace's. It was my late mother's handwriting. And the words she had written years ago changed everything I thought I knew about this extraordinary anniversary. My mother's words waiting for me. What if the greatest anniversary gift wasn't hidden in a box, a bouquet, or even a beautiful building, but in a sentence written years ago by someone you thought could never speak to you again? The moment I stepped inside the Carter Family Learning House, every sound around me seemed to disappear. My eyes were fixed on the framed wooden plaque hanging in the center of the room. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly, and before I read a single word, I somehow knew this was the piece of the story my husband had been protecting all along. I slowly walked toward the plaque. The room around me was warm and welcoming. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with children's stories, beginner English readers, family novels, and community resources. Comfortable chairs sat in small circles to encourage conversation. Colorful signs decorated the walls with simple English phrases like, "Welcome," "Take your time," and "Every voice matters." It wasn't just a learning center. It felt like a home built for courage. But none of that held my attention. Only the plaque. My fingers gently touched the wooden frame before I began reading. If you ever have the chance to help someone find confidence through words, never wait for the perfect moment. A kind voice can change a life long before perfect grammar ever will. I couldn't breathe for a second. Those words belonged to my mother. She had written them inside one of her old journals many years earlier. I had completely forgotten. Behind me, my husband quietly said, "Grace found the journal last winter." I turned toward my sister. She smiled through tears. I remembered how much Mom believed in encouraging people instead of correcting them. I nodded slowly. She always said communication comes before perfection. Exactly. My husband stepped beside me. When Grace showed me those pages, I knew what your anniversary gift had to become. I looked around the room once again. Suddenly, every detail carried new meaning. The reading corner wasn't simply furniture. It represented every conversation I had dreamed of leading. The shelves weren't only filled with books. They were filled with possibilities. Even the sign saying, "Every voice matters," reflected something I had often told Emily whenever she felt nervous speaking in class. One English expression immediately came to mind: find your voice. Americans use it to describe gaining confidence to express yourself honestly. For language learners, it means becoming brave enough to speak. For me, standing in that room, it meant something much bigger. It meant finally believing that my own story could help someone else begin theirs. Grace gently handed me an old notebook. It was my mother's journal. The pages had yellowed with time, but her handwriting remained beautifully clear. One paragraph had been marked with a ribbon. I read it aloud. The strongest families are not the ones who never misunderstand each other. They are the ones who choose to understand each other again. The room became silent. Neighbors smiled. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Even my husband looked down for a moment. I closed the journal carefully. I almost believed you had forgotten our anniversary. He nodded. I know. I spent the entire morning creating stories in my head. So did I, he admitted. I laughed softly.
You did?
I kept wondering if you'd stay angry long enough for me to finish the surprise. Everyone laughed. The tension that had followed us all day finally disappeared. Emily ran over carrying 2 small paper cups of hot chocolate. Mom. Yes? Dad said learning together is more fun than learning alone. I smiled. He says smart things sometimes. Emily giggled. Only sometimes. The room filled with laughter again. Then Grace walked toward the small stage at the front of the building. She picked up the microphone. I have one last announcement. The conversations immediately quieted. She looked directly at me. Starting tonight, this isn't just a community learning center. She paused dramatically. It will also become the home of Emma's weekly slow English story nights. The audience applauded enthusiastically. I stared at her in complete surprise. My, what? She laughed. You'll tell real-life stories every Friday evening. I never agreed to that. My husband smiled. You will. I don't even have lesson plans. You already have stories. The audience applauded again. Looking around the room, I suddenly realized something beautiful. Every person standing there had once struggled with something. Some had learned English as adults. Some had overcome loneliness after retirement. Some had rebuilt their lives after difficult seasons. None of them were perfect. Yet every single one of them was smiling. Perhaps that was the real lesson. Confidence doesn't begin when fear disappears. It begins when someone makes you feel safe enough to try. Just then, the lights dimmed once more. A spotlight illuminated the stage. My husband walked toward the microphone carrying one final envelope. He looked directly at me and smiled. I've been saving this for the end. What is it? He held up the envelope. Our anniversary letter. The real one. He nodded. The one I wanted to give you before everything went wonderfully and unexpectedly wrong. The entire room became silent. He slowly opened the envelope. Then he looked into my eyes and began reading the very first line. The 3 words that were never forgotten. What if the 3 words you waited all day to hear were never forgotten at all? What if silence wasn't the absence of love, but the final piece of a promise so carefully protected that it could only be understood at the very end? As my husband stood beneath the warm lights of the Carter family learning house, holding the last envelope in his hands, I realized this anniversary had never been about flowers, gifts, or perfect timing. It had always been about discovering whether love is measured by what we hear or by what someone quietly builds when we are not looking. The room became completely still. Even the children who had been whispering moments earlier settled into their seats. My husband unfolded the letter carefully, smiled at me, and took a slow breath. When I wrote this, he began, I imagined reading it during a quiet dinner after saying, Happy Anniversary the moment I woke up. But life had different plans. A few people smiled softly. He looked directly into my eyes. My dear Emma, 12 years ago, we promised to choose each other every single day. I believed those words then, and I believe them even more today. I know life has become busy with work, family, school events, grocery lists, broken appliances, and ordinary routines. Sometimes ordinary days are so loud that they almost hide extraordinary love. I never wanted our marriage to become something we simply maintained. I wanted it to keep growing. My eyes filled with tears once again. He continued, "You often apologize because you think your English isn't perfect. You worry about making mistakes while speaking. But every time I watched you encourage someone else to keep trying, I realized something beautiful. You were already giving people exactly what they needed, not perfect grammar, but confidence." The room remained silent. "You once told me that stories changed your life because stories made learning feel human. That's why I wanted to build a place where every person, every child, every family could discover that same feeling." He folded the letter for a moment before smiling. And yes, the crowd laughed because they already knew what was coming. I absolutely remembered our anniversary. Everyone applauded. I remembered it every single day while planning this surprise. I laughed through my tears. "So, why didn't you say it?" He grinned. "Because I wanted my first anniversary gift to be a future, not just 3 words." I shook my head, smiling. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." "I know. I'm not sure you've earned forgiveness yet." He laughed. "I was hoping this building might help." It definitely helps. The entire room burst into warm laughter. One of the most beautiful English expressions I have ever learned is "love is shown," not just spoken. While it isn't an official proverb, Americans often express this idea in different ways. Listening is important. Speaking is important. But consistent actions are what make words believable. That lesson stayed with me more deeply than any grammar rule ever could. I stepped onto the small stage beside my husband and took the microphone for the first time. I spent a day believing my husband had forgotten me. A few people nodded sympathetically. But now I understand something different. I looked around a room filled with neighbors, friends, teachers, volunteers, children, and my family. Sometimes we create painful stories because we only see one page instead of the whole book. Several people smiled. If you're learning English, don't quit because one conversation feels difficult. I paused. If you're building a marriage, don't give up because one day feels confusing. Another pause. And if someone you love has always shown kindness, don't let one unanswered question erase years of faithful actions. The room erupted into applause. Emily walked onto the stage and slipped her small hand into mine. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Can we read stories together every Friday?" I smiled. "I'd love that." Grace joined us. So would I. My husband wrapped one arm around both of us. So would I. At that moment, I realized the greatest anniversary gift had never been hidden inside an envelope or behind a photograph.
It was standing beside me.
A family that kept choosing one another. A dream that had become a place. A community ready to learn together. And a reminder that love often works quietly long before it becomes visible. As everyone gathered for our first group photo inside the Carter Family Learning House, I noticed the wooden plaque one last time. Every voice matters. I smiled because those 3 words no longer described only English learners. They described every heart willing to speak honestly, listen patiently, forgive generously, and begin again. That evening, just before the camera flashed, my husband leaned close enough for only me to hear. At last, after the longest anniversary day of my life, he whispered the 3 words I had been waiting for since sunrise. "Happy anniversary, Emma." And somehow, because of everything that had happened, they had never sounded more beautiful. That's all for today. I'll create many more stories like this in the future. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.